The year is 1977. Under the spotlight, Agnetha Fältskog's voice is calm and perfect. She represents elegance and flawless pop harmony to the entire world. But there was a woman with a lot of strife hidden beneath that golden smile. Few were aware that, despite the world's admiration for her tenderness and calm, Agnetha was carrying a hidden blacklist of musicians with whom she disagreed, mistrusted, or simply despised. Even the most experienced music historians are shocked by what Agnetha Fältskog discloses today, after decades of quiet, rumors, and conjecture. These 5 musicians, who ranged from hard rock egos to provocative pop queens, from glam excess to punk mayhem, tested Agnetha's emotional boundaries. It's likely that you've heard about Mick Jagger's attempt to make out with Agnetha backstage at a 1979 festival. Behind the scenes, everything was anything but nice, but she dismissed it with a smile. Mick embodied everything Agnetha hated about the music world, with his snake-like appeal and wild energy. Unpredictability, chaos, and stadium-sized egos. They were the Rolling Stones. They made a lot of noise. They were also careless. As a painstaking perfectionist, Agnetha valued harmony and control in both her personal and musical life. Jagger, on the other hand, was the epitome of rock and roll excess. Agnetha reportedly stated, "There's charm, and then there's danger," in an unreleased 1983 interview. The latter was Mick. The tipping point? According to rumors, Mick proposed a light-hearted duet full of sexual innuendo during a backstage encounter in London. Agnetha walked out of the room silently, clearly uneasy. The next performer Agnetha was unable to relate to came from a completely other musical and stylistic universe. Consider David Bowie's avant-garde spirit, silver jumpsuits, alien alter personalities, and the glam explosion of the early 1970s. Bowie was considered a genius by many. But to Agnetha, he was a glitter-wrapped enigma that she would never want to unravel. She couldn't relate to him, even though she appreciated his talent. In 1976, Agnetha reportedly spent the evening conversing with everyone else at a European award presentation where ABBA and Bowie were sitting at the same table. At one point, she said his performances were frigid yet great. It wasn't only aesthetics that made her uncomfortable. Bowie was unreservedly adventurous, sexual, and political. His presence was overwhelming to a woman who valued musical clarity, seclusion, and modesty. In a private remark, Bowie allegedly referred to ABBA as Swedish robots, a jab Agnetha would never forget. A punk legend whose name embodied everything Agnetha shunned was another performer who profoundly disturbed her. If Agnetha represented elegance and melody, Sid Vicious represented chaos. Agnetha felt the hate, and Sid, as bassist of the Sex Pistols, symbolized the violent reaction against all that ABBA stood for. She remembered passing a wall in London that had been vandalized with the words "ABBA sucks" written in vivid red letters. In an interview that same week, the Sex Pistols made fun of ABBA by referring to them as plastic perfection for housewives who are brain dead. Although Agnetha never gave a public response, she was distraught in private. She was afraid of punk rock. She interpreted it as animosity rather than revolt. Following a contentious 1978 festival lineup that put ABBA and the Sex Pistols in the same location, due to threats from punk supporters, ABBA's security was boosted that same evening. Later on, Agnetha would characterize that period as depressing and draining. Agnetha found it especially hard to admire the next person on her list because of his intelligence and contempt for pop culture. To Agnetha, Frank Zappa's musical genius was accompanied by a contempt. In a well-known critique of popular music, Zappa claimed that ABBA produced auditory suites for those under a sedative. It hurt to hear that remark. Private correspondence between ABBA's management reveals that Agnetha felt ridiculed and denigrated by musicians such as Zappa, who presented themselves as genuine artists rather than commercial performers. She thought his humor was coarse, his attitude contemptuous, and his music inconsistent. In a Swedish TV interview, she thoughtfully responded, "There is art in simplicity," when questioned about experimental rock. Genius is not always complex. It was the closest she had ever been to mentioning Zappa by name. And lastly, Agnetha never wanted the lady who stood for everything to be outspoken, brazen, and unrestrained. Agnetha was withdrawing into her own world when Madonna burst onto the scene in the early 1980s. Madonna was empowering to some. She was overpowering to Agnetha. In a 1992 interview that was never broadcast, Agnetha once remarked, "I couldn't understand why it had to be so vulgar." Madonna's notorious, virgin-like performance at the 1984 MTV Wemma was the subject of her reference. It was all too much, the writhing, the underwear, the religious argument. Agnetha's modesty was a traditional Swedish trait from her upbringing. She had always been reluctant to become famous. In contrast, Madonna battled scandal with scandal and courted fame like a lover. It wasn't envy. It was rejection. Agnetha never wanted to approach the line that Madonna had crossed. By doing this, she represented a new musical generation that Agnetha was unable to identify with. Agnetha is no longer concealing these facts after decades of civil silence. That is not the end of the list. Other names, artists whose flamboyance, controversy, or criticism touched Agnetha's heart, lurk in the background. She also felt uneasy about the moniker of a rock excess theatrical icon. Agnetha found Queen's musical accuracy admirable, but she found Freddie's extravagant showmanship and exaggerated stage demeanor difficult to handle. To some, his brilliant intensity was like a volcano. However, it felt intrusive to Agnetha. Under Fireworks, Freddie sang operatic anthems in diamond-studded leotards, a style she admired for its nuance and emotional sensitivity. In a Swedish magazine, she allegedly called Queen too opulent for their own good, and she privately admitted that she didn't find their concerts thrilling, but rather draining. She graciously denied a joint interview with Freddie during an awards event in 1980, stating that she liked music to speak for itself. According to insiders, however, her real motivation was unease over being eclipsed by a man who exuded theatrical strength. Agnetha saw Freddie as a new kind of entertainer who transformed performances into spectacles and feelings into outbursts. He shouted with his whole body, but she sung with her soul. It was dissonance, not envy. She had spent her entire life trying to avoid the mayhem that Freddie's magnetism could too quickly turn into. A darker, more ghoulish figure appears as we proceed down her silent list. Alice Cooper, who was well known for his theatrical antics that evoked terror, was just too much for Agnetha's sensitive sensitivities. Agnetha represented purity, grace, and restrained emotion, whereas he transformed concerts into ghoulish spectacles complete with guillotines, snakes, and mock executions. He enjoyed upsetting the crowd. She tried to calm them. According to reports, Agnetha supposedly refused to participate in the press panel at a music event in Germany in 1975 if Cooper was seated next to her. Those who witnessed it said she was clearly shaken when she found out he would be there, muttering that she didn't want to share the air with someone who made music scary. Shock was a weapon to Alice. It was a violation to Agnetha. To her, the theatrical murders, the snakes, and the artificial blood weren't merely tricks. She believed in musical beauty and emotional authenticity, yet they reflected a dark theatricality that fiercely conflicted with them. She later acknowledged that she had never seen the pleasure in creating a scary soundtrack. She attempted to heal with harmony where he provoked with horror. It was a conflict of values as much as styles. Another person who personified style, passion, and courage follows. Agnetha was nothing compared to Grace Jones. Ferociously vocal, androgynous, and intimidating, Grace Jones burst into the scene like a bolt of lightning, while Agnetha moved delicately between stages, encased in pastel light and pure melodies. Audacious, aggressive, and unreservedly combative. Agnetha tactfully stated in a 1990 interview that not all music is intended to be calming, but underneath that composed response was a maelstrom of anxiety. According to insiders, she felt that Grace's persona was harsh, distant, and even antagonistic to the principles she cherished. It was a show of strength rather than weakness, as seen by the imposing shoulder pads, the harsh lighting, and the cutting choreography. Agnetha, whose art was founded on emotional openness and vulnerability, felt that Grace's every action shouted authority. "I don't mind powerful women," she reportedly told a close friend once, but it appeared like she was just showing off her strength rather than sharing herself. It was sensitivity versus provocation, melody versus horror. And there was no space for harmony in that split. Then came the most outrageous performer of all. Iggy Pop was more than just a rock star. He was ferocious, unpredictable, shirtless, pandemonium, and incarnate. He shouted, bled, and growled on stage. Offstage, he was a force of energy that rebelled against structure and convention. He was seen by many as the unvarnished voice of revolution. He was Agnetha's worst nightmare, though, and she fled from him. Music should lift the soul, not tear it apart, as Agnetha, with her kind demeanor and melodic soul, once remarked. Iggy then ripped it open. She reportedly looked pale and mumbled, "I'm glad I never had to share a stage with that madness," when she learned about his notorious 1977 Detroit performance, in which he smeared blood on himself in front of a roaring crowd. He believed in chaos, whereas she believed in harmony. He unleashed emotional warfare where she sought emotional equilibrium. She refrained from bringing up his name in interviews, as though calling upon him might cause her to re-enter the unstable circle she had so carefully steered clear of. Agnetha Fältskog was silent for decades. She let the music do the talking. However, as she has grown older and gained perspective, she has started to let truth to elude her memory. These weren't tabloid conflicts or public feuds. The silent hallways of renown were the scene of these private storms. She wasn't disparaging. She maintained her honor. But behind those blue eyes, there were fights, no doubt about it. She is now at last opening out to the outside world,